Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Immerse Yourself. Thank you for joining us here at the museum and over Zoom. If you are in Zoom, be sure to put in the chat where you're watching from and how many people are with you. And I'll go ahead and get started. So thank you again for coming. And I do want to thank this month's sponsors as well. Retired Admiral Kurt Tidd, as well as David and Patty Gross. Thank you so much for sponsoring this month's Immerse Yourself. Some upcoming events that we have here at the museum, if you have not seen it already, we have our special exhibit, which is only open until December 31st. It's Salvaging the Deep. It's a lot of really cool stuff, including a ton of things about the Monitor, which Bobbie is going to take us through tonight. So if you've not seen that special exhibit, be sure to catch it before it leaves the museum on December 31st this year. Coming up in November, on November 2nd, Art McKee's birthday, we have 2 guided tours on that day. They are included with your admission. So if you've ever wanted to see the museum and get a complimentary guided tour with that experience, come in on November 2nd. There's one at 11 and again at 2 p.m. And again, it's going to highlight Art McKee and his treasure diving excursions. For the month of October, we have 2 fundraisers going on. We are raffling off 2 really cool items. One is the quilt that you guys can see here in the library. And the other is that haunted diver that is sitting over there in the corner. He's not on right now, but when he is, he makes some very scary sounds and moves around, and he's got a glowing green skull underneath his helmet. He's really cool. If you would like to get tickets to win either of those items as part of our October raffles, they're available on our website. And if you're here in the museum right now, you can buy them at the gift shop. The last thing I'll mention is next week, we have our Halloween event, our yearly treasure treat night. That's next Thursday on the 24th. So if you have kids or a family and you want to come in, do some trick-or-treating, there's a costume contest. There is going to be a snow cone truck here as well. If you want to get snow cones, nachos, that kind of stuff. That's next Thursday, the 24th, from 5:30 to 7 here at the museum. Our next month's speaker is going to be on November 20th. It's going to be Rob Dixon. He is a lighthouse conservationist and president of the Friends of the Pool Incorporated nonprofit, which owns Alligator Reef Lighthouse. So they're in charge of the conservation of that structure, which is just an iconic Islamorada lighthouse, and they are going to talk about how they are working to preserve it. This month's speaker is Bobbie Scholley. She is a retired U.S. Navy captain, and she was the on-scene commander of the USS Monitor Expedition 2002, where they salvaged a ton of different artifacts, including the turret from that Civil War wreck. And I'm going to let her tell you the rest of that story. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things off to Bobbie.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. I want to say, first of all, it was fabulous that I got to follow Julia, who gave this wonderful presentation last month. So how many were here last month to hear that? Yeah, good job, Julia. Because it leads in perfectly to my presentation. She did salvage in the 20th century last month. And so now I get to talk about salvage in the just barely in the 21st century. But it's a perfect lead in. And if you haven't gotten to see her exhibit here at the museum, please come and see it, because it does have a beautiful exhibit on Monitor. Thank you also to the museum for having me here this evening, and to the sponsors, Patty and David Gross, and to Admiral Tidd, who is not here, but he's a very good friend, and appreciate him sponsoring me too. So I'm here at the History of Diving Museum to talk about one of my operations when I was active duty in the in the Navy. So I don't know if that means that my operation is Navy history, or if that means that I'm now old enough to be part of history. I don't know, Sally, what do you think? Okay, I'm not going to be offended by that. So let's get down to business. So but who was here for Joe, my good friend Joe DeTuris, Commander Joe DeTuris? Yes. So you've seen this slide before. Marine salvage. This is a definition. Marine salvage is not rocket science. There is nothing there's nothing in concrete about marine science, not to be a pun, but so keep this in mind as we talk about the Monitor salvage operations, because You cannot go by a cookie cutter recipe when you talk about marine science. You have to be flexible. So keep this in mind as we continue on. The Monitor. What is special about the Monitor? People have been fascinated by the Monitor all the way back from the very beginning. And I found that as we were doing the Monitor expeditions, that people were still fascinated even into our operation. I was amazed at how much attention we got as we were doing these expeditions. I was not used to the attention that we got, not just here local off the coast of Cape Hatteras, but throughout the entire nation. We got attention from all over the nation, and not something that we were used to, but people are fascinated by the Monitor. And it is a story that has been going on for centuries now. And it was something that we found was well earned. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Back in 1862, the Monitor was built in 20 days. So even from the very beginning, it was unique and it was fascinating. 20 days to build a warship, a naval warship. And then, of course, we continue on to the Battle of Hampton Roads. I think everybody probably is familiar with the naval battle of Hampton Roads in March of 1862 between the Monitor and the CSS Virginia. It was not a decisive battle, but it was an important battle. Basically, most people would say it was a draw. Of course, that depends on which side of the line you were on, whether it was a draw or not. But it did change the course of naval battles from then on. And so that became very important. But the Monitor had a very short history. And it was less than a year later, New Year's Eve, that the Monitor sank as she was being towed around the Cape Hatteras by the USS Rhode Island. Now, Monitor was never built to be an ocean-going ship. She had a very low freeboard. And of course, when she was transiting around in the open ocean during a storm off Cape Hatteras, she sank, and we lost 16 Navy crew members, despite the efforts of the USS Rhode Island, who heroically tried to save as much of the crew as possible. 5 members of the Rhode Island were Medal of Honor award winners due to their heroic efforts. Now, the significance of the Monitor, many things were significant about the Monitor. First, ironclad built, the Battle of Hampton Roads, the battle between the 2 ironclads. First revolving gun turret, also had a unique vibrating side lever steam engine. What does that mean? It means the engine was sideways, and therefore you could put the engine below the water line where it was better protected from enemy fire, meant that the engineering space could be smaller. It was the first of a series of 66 ships of that class. We were tasked with recovering this, amongst many other artifacts, the revolving gun turret, hopefully with the guns inside, and the steam engine. So that was a big job that we were being tasked with. Rediscovery. After the Monitor sank that New Year's Eve off the coast of Cape Hatteras, it was missing for over 100 years, and nobody could find it until after a lot of research by some scientists out of Duke University. It was discovered again in 1973 in 230 feet off the coast of Cape Hatteras. Then in 1975, it was designated by NOAA as the nation's first marine sanctuary. And then after that, NOAA started designating more and more underwater sanctuaries, and that started their underwater sanctuary program. So that was another big first for the Monitor. And then in 1987, Congress designated the Mariners Museum as the principal museum for Monitor artifacts, and it became the lead for preserving and maintaining Monitor artifacts. So there's the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary. You can see it there on the chart. And in addition to some other expeditions out to monitor, NOAA started sponsoring a whole series of expeditions starting in 1977, and you can see the dates there, that were primarily manned by civilian scuba divers, side scan sonar operations, and ROVs. And these were primarily to investigate the condition that the monitor was in, take assessments, and document the monitor. But then in 1998, NOAA was tasked to submit a long-range preservation plan for how to keep this national treasure from deteriorating completely, because it was starting to deteriorate. If you go in and look at the exhibit here at the museum, you'll see that when Monitor sank, she actually flipped over and she sank to the bottom, 230 feet beneath the seas, and on top of her turret. And the gun turret actually came loose and slid aft on the Monitor. And then the ship landed on top of the turret. And so the turret is upside down. And that caused it to start, for various reasons, it started, it accelerated the deterioration quite a bit of the hull. And plus just the movement of being out there off the coast of Cape Hatteras, which we all know has a lot of currents, it has a lot of weather, and hurricanes coming through there. So there were a lot of reasons why the deterioration of the wreck was accelerated. And so as the first National Marine Sanctuary, we wanted to try to preserve this. Now, a lot of people think, oh, we have a shipwreck on the bottom. Well, let's just go down there and pick up this ship and bring it to the surface and bring it back to the museum, because that's what we do when we do underwater salvage. It's if you're familiar with the Hunley, the Civil War submarine that was located off the coast of Charleston, they managed to pick up that little submarine, which really is a little submarine, and they picked it up whole and they took it to the museum and they were able to conserve it there. Well, that's a misnomer, because first of all, the Hunley was in very shallow water, and the Monitor is in very deep water. It's not all intact, and it's deteriorating, and you can't just go down there and pick up a ship of that size in this kind of condition after 120 years, 140 years, and bring it in to the surface in that manner. So we had to have a preservation plan. And it's a national sanctuary in place. So we didn't necessarily want to bring it up all intact. So we had to, so NOAA had to come up with a plan and submit it to Congress. So how did the Navy get involved? Well, NOAA, who works in conjunction with the Navy on other projects, got together with the Navy and with the Mariners Museum and to come up with this plan. And the first time that the Navy worked with NOAA and the Mariners Museum was in August of 1995, and they went out on their first expedition called the Mars Expedition with the USS Edenton. Now, for the Navy, we had to use some of our specialized equipment to do salvage or an expedition at this depth, which for us is a mixed gas dive because of the depth. The Navy uses helium and oxygen when we dive to these depths of water. And the only equipment we had on the East Coast for this type of diving was aboard the USS Edenton, which was a mixed gas platform. And so in August of 1995, Edenton went out with NOAA on board, and NOAA being the lead agency for these expeditions, and did a short expedition to start operations to recover the propeller. That was the first item, the first artifact that was in the plan to recover. And due to the weather and the length of the operation, they were not able to recover the propeller completely, but they started the cut on the propeller shaft. And then the next expedition was in June of 1998, was the next time that the Navy was able to get out onto the scene and continue the expedition. By this time, the Edenton had been decommissioned. That was part of the Navy's plan, ship plan. And so they no longer had a mixed gas mixed gas diving ship available. But the Navy was moving to more portable dive systems, and Mobile Diving and Salvage Unit 2, which was an East Coast Diving Command, had just acquired and certified a portable flyaway mixed gas dive system that could be placed on any ship of opportunity, making it a mixed gas diving platform. And then the Navy divers could dive with this flyaway mixed gas dive system. And so Monitor would become the first actual training opportunity to try out this new mixed gas diving system. So in June of 1998, MUDSU 2 took their new mixed gas system out on a vessel of opportunity, the Kelly Choess, which also, by the way, had a heavy lift capability on the ship, and went and with NOAA as the lead, went and finished cutting the drive shaft and recovered the propeller in 1998. So the Navy continued to be involved with NOAA at NOAA's request. And in 1999, they went out again, put the flyaway mixed gas system on another Navy vessel, the Grasp, did some survey operations in 1998. But in order to do this properly, what do you need to really do underwater, deep ocean underwater salvage? You need money in order to make it work. So to get the right amount of money, and this is obviously a government operation because NOAA is funded by the government, the Navy is funded by the government, the museum is not, but they are the congressionally mandated recipient of the artifacts. So we had to storm the hill. And to storm the hill, NOAA, the director of the National Marine Monitor Marine Sanctuary, Dr. John Broadwater, and the Naval Sea Systems Command Supervisor of Diving, Captain Chris Murray, got all their paperwork together. They got their plan of action together, and they stormed the hill. And they took their plan to Congress to ask for proper funding. And this was their plan. They had a 3-year plan of how they would properly stabilize the Monitor, and then what artifacts they thought that they should bring back, and how they would do that. And they went to Congress and they got appropriate funding to do that. And you can see there that for the 3 years, that's the funding that they were able to get approved by Congress. And that began the start of this partnership that between NOAA, the U.S. Navy, and the Mariners Museum, with the help of Congress for the funding. And that started the 3-year partnership that would become the expeditions that we talk about today. So Expedition 2000, the objectives there were to start the stabilization. And I said that before that the Monitor had settled upside down on the ocean floor with the turret on underneath and aft. So that armor belt, that very special armor belt on the Monitor, which was made up of layers of steel plates surrounding wooden planks, was very heavy. And when it was sitting on top of the turret, that heavy armor belt was suspended up off the ocean floor. And of course, gravity was trying to pull that heavy weight down. And that was causing the armor belt to try to pull the hull, the hull of the ship down with it, and was pulling the hull apart. And so we needed to stabilize the armor belt that was free floating up in above the surface, above the ocean floor. So to do that, they came up with a plan to, several plans were thought of. And so they came up with a plan to put these bags of grout. So they had to take the bags down and fill them with grout, to put grout bags underneath the armor belt to stabilize it so that it would slow down the deterioration. And then the other item that needed to be done in the summer of 2000 was to put down a lifting mechanism that could be used in place for when they started removing the steam engine from the engineering room. And those were the 2 objections for the summer of 2000. And you can see there the divers working on the grout bags to get them in place. And then the grout was taken down through a big tube from 230 feet from the surface. And it was just shipped down through that tube into the grout bags. And then the engine recovery system was lifted from the barge down with the crane and settled down very carefully over the Monitor without dinging the Monitor. Because remember, this is an archaeological site, and our mission was not to cause any further damage on the Monitor from what had been damaged when it sank to the bottom. So very carefully lower the engine recovery system so that when we started cutting the engine free, we would do it all down on the bottom and then hook it up to this frame before we lifted the whole thing to the surface. And so that was all put in place in the summer of 2000 and then left in place until we would come back the next year. And there you can see the engine recovery system going into the water. So then in 2001, and here you can see a model, not nearly as nice as the model we have here at this museum. So the model over there is much nicer. But there's a model of the what the Monitor kind of looks like on the ocean bottom. You see the turret sticking out there back aft, and you can see that the hull is deteriorating. That's that's the bottom of the ship there, or kind of what it looked like back in 2001. And the turret sticking out. And you can see the armor belt going around the edge of the Monitor and setting on top of the turret. And so 2001, the objective was to cut the engine free, remove the armor belt over the, to cut the engine free and remove the engine and lift it all up to the surface. So we had to come up with some additional equipment to do that with. We had to use a much larger barge with a larger lift capability, a 500-ton crane and a 100-ton crane, a bigger barge because we needed more divers out there. We had to come up with a saturation dive team to help us in addition to the mixed gas dive team. And we needed to be out there longer, 43 days. So we used the Navy ship for a shorter period of time with just mixed gas divers. And then we needed to go out there longer with the two teams, the mixed gas and the saturation divers. And you can see there, we needed the propeller and the shaft had already been removed. We needed to cut the engine free from the engineering space. And then we needed to, once it was cut free, the divers would rig it all to the engineering recovery system, which you can see all those stanchions there and the rigging, the yellow rigging lines. And then we would once it was rigged in place and lifted away from the Monitor, then we would lift the whole system to the surface. And then we set the whole system on the barge, and then it would all come ashore. So that little ball of stuff there, that's the steam engine. And let me tell you, it is a beautiful piece of equipment. If you ever make it to the museum up in Newport, it is a beautiful piece of equipment. It doesn't look like it there. It looks like a little piece of dirt or rocks or something else, but it is a beautiful piece of equipment. So 2002, this is what we're really interested in. 2000, and you can see the model's been updated because there's a little hole back there in the engine room where the engine came out. So 2002, we need to get to that turret. And that turret is underneath that armor belt. So we have to cut a big hunk of that armor belt off so we can get to the turret. We can't just slide the turret out because it's pinned down there by the armor belt. So we need to cut the armor belt and that stern section away to expose the turret. Then we need to set something down there to grab the turret and to bring it up, because the turret's this round cylinder thing. It's kind of like a soda can. You have to grab it, but you don't want to grab it and squish it like a soda can and hurt it or break it, because then it's game over. And then you're hoping that the two Dobbin guns are inside. Nobody knows if they are or not, but you're hoping they are. And then rig it all to the surface without breaking anything. And so We had the same team going into 2002, the dream team. We have the U.S. Navy divers. Phoenix International was the Navy's contractor for salvage operations, and they're the people that we go to get other contracts, to get subcontractors. Global Industries, this was the subcontractor that we contracted out to get our saturation dive system, because at this point the Navy did not have a portable saturation system. Can't tell you what we did have, but we didn't have that. So we needed to get that for this for the operation for 2001 and 2002. So we had to go to a commercial company to get that. And I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. We had NOAA, of course, they were the boss. It's their site and it's ultimately their job. And the Mariners Museum, they're the recipient of everything. I used to talk to the president of the Mariners Museum, Mr. Hightower, and I said, okay, my job is to birth this baby, and then I'm going to give you this baby, and it's your job to raise it, metaphorically speaking. And then we had the Manson Golf Barge, the Wotan barge, and their crew. And the Wotan barge came from Louisiana. They were an offshore oil company barge from Louisiana. And so you can see them right underneath there, in all the white hard hats. The barge crew lead was Big G, and his assistant was Little G, and the crane operator, whose name was Bobbie, he's the guy with the white beard there. I don't know how old he was. He looked pretty old to me back then, but yeah, these days he doesn't look that old. But these guys were so good at what they did. I can't tell you how good they were. Bobbie could could take his 500-ton crane hook and put it on a pin down at 240 feet beneath the sea. And I mean, I think he just had, I don't know, voodoo, or I don't know what he was using, but he was so good. And the galley crew was from Louisiana also. So you better believe we were eating some good chow for 45 days off the coast of Cape Hatteras, which meant that, I also had to hit the exercise room every once in a while. But these guys were fabulous. And it was so interesting because here we had, 120 Navy divers. We had, 10 or 15 civilian government guys. And then we had this crew of Louisiana boys. And it was one big team. It was incredible how quickly everybody came together. It was amazing. So here's the expedition for 2002. The Wotan barge. We had divers, mixed gas divers and saturation divers, and they were all Navy divers. And we were out there for 45 days, and those were our objectives. So saturation diving, here's the good stuff. We had to, because we didn't have our own portable saturation system, we took the commercial system, utilizing from Global Marine. We had to modify it to meet Navy standards and to certify it to Navy standards. So we had to make some modifications to it, which we did. The Navy divers did this. And then it was operated by Navy divers and dove by Navy divers. We had a global representative out on the barge with us, but we rented it from Global, but the Navy divers manned it and operated it. And that was the first time we had ever done that in Navy history, or as far as we knew. And we had to get a waiver from the CNO in order to do that, because we don't normally use that sort of that sort of equipment for Navy dives. We had 20 saturation divers. Most of them came from the Navy Experimental Dive Unit right here in Panama City, Florida. A few of them were in other commands, but they had come from the Navy Experimental Dive Unit. We had we had 20 of the team, but we basically you can see the system there on the barge. We had to load it on the barge and weld it down in place. We had one 2-man personal transfer chamber, or the dive bell. We had 2 6-man chambers, habitats, that were sitting on top of the the barge. So our habitats were on top of the barge, 2 6-mans, the handling system, generators, and we were using the Navy's Mark 21 dive helmets, just like our mixed gas helmets. Those are the Herbie Morgan Superlight 16, or Superlight, yeah, 16s. The same that we use with mixed gas, only these are configured for saturation. For saturation, they're blue. For mixed gas, they're yellow. So you can see that in the pictures. So here we go. The Navy divers are operating the console. You can see that there. The habitats are supposed to be able to hold 6 people. We only had 4-man dive saturation teams. So we only put 4-man. You can see that still looks pretty tight. I don't know that I'd go into that habitat with 5 other people, but I wasn't doing saturation diving. So we only put 4 people into the habitats at a time. So we were running for saturation diving. We were running basically 1 team at a time. And so a 4-person team, we were doing 24/7 operations, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 4-person team would be in saturation. So for that team, 2 people would go into the bell, and they would climb out of the habitat into the bell through the hatch, and then the bell would go over the side. The bell would go over the side. We'd lower it over the side with the handling system, and the bell with those 2 divers would go down the monitor to go to work. 1 diver would leave the bell, you can see him crawling out of the bell, and that 1 saturation diver would go to work for 6 hours. The other person in the bell would stay in the bell dry, and he would be the standby diver for 6 hours. And then they'd swap places for 6 hours. So their 12 hours on the bottom would be 1 in, 1 out for 6 hours each. And then at the end of 12 hours, we'd bring the bell back up over the side, marry it to the hatch, to the habitat. And then those 2 divers would go back into the habitat for their 12 hours off. The next 2 divers would go into the bell for their 12 hours on, and they do the same thing. 6 hours of work, 6 hours of standby, and then they swap. And then they'd come back and they'd have 12 hours of rest. And then they do that for, 7 to 12, 15 days. It would depend. And they'd be in saturation for that long. And then when they were done with their saturation dive, then they would come out of saturation and they would start their very long decompression. And then while they were decompressing, we had the other habitat. So we would take another 4-person team and saturate them, and they could go back to work while we were bringing the first saturation team up. So we didn't have to wait, because we had 2 habitats. We didn't have to wait for the first team to come to the surface. We could start the second team into saturation right away. So we could do almost 24/7 constantly. And because we had a closed bell, we could pretty much put that bell to work in almost any weather condition, because we didn't have to worry too much about winds and seas. If it got really bad, we would have to stop saturation dive. So we could almost have a single saturation diver at work almost all the time. But we couldn't do the job with just 1 diver on the bottom. We had to have more than 1 diver. So you can see the blue helmet there. That's saturation dive. We also had the mixed gas diver. We call these bounce divers. These are what we all think about when we dive. You do a bounce dive, and then you do the decompression. So these are our normal divers. These are normal Navy divers. And these were using the flyweight mixed gas dive system. Our system now that we've been using for years, since 1998, whatever it was, 99. And tried and true, proven. We use it all the time in the fleet. And we have it on board there. And with this system, we're using Heliox. We have 2 teams again, and 2 25-man teams. It's a little bit more man intensive. But we have 2 divers going in the water, going to work at any one time. And then a 3rd diver is standby. He stays on the barge, fully suited out without the helmet on. The helmet's just sitting there ready to go. He's the emergency standby diver. And they go down in an open stage. You can see there the stage. And they go down to work in an open stage. And they go down as a pair. Video here. I won't. So this is kind of what a mixed gas, Navy mixed gas hard hat dive on Monitor. This is not 2002 because I wanted to show you kind of a fun one. Well, not fun. This is from 2000 when they were filling drop bags.
Okay, top side.
Understand. Okay, both divers.
Okay, red. Okay, red.
Both divers, move out.
Run away. Tight on the front. You see back there? It's got a lot.
Is that grout up there?
Yeah,
Oh, that's great.
yeah, it's filled in good. And it's
Is it in?
it's 1 inch and making contact in the back.
Right. Is there any more room in the top of the bag?
No green. It's tight in the front. We can hit it. Probably just off the other nozzle. Already. So this is all tight.
Chris, we got about 10 more cubic feet to go down into the bag.
Okay,
And that's it.
okay, let me look then on the other side. Well, at this point, I just keep going.
Chris, look over to the right side of that bag. Is that a top strap tied down right there?
Yes, yes.
Cut that.
It's green. It's tight.
Now see if you can shift the top of that bag around.
Right.
9 cubic feet to go.
Okay, yeah, just keep it coming. It's still in the hole, nice. Okay, top side.
All right, it goes on for longer, but you get the idea. Okay, so remember that paragraph I showed you at the beginning about marine salvage not being an exact science? Well, that's part of the reason why it's not an exact science, because you don't know what's going, you never know what's going to happen on the bottom. You have to adapt as you go. And you have to have this, not only this communication, which sometimes is difficult, but you also have to have this trust between your team members. Boy, I miss that stuff. But you can see that a lot goes into it. We have helmet mounted cameras on those helmets the whole time. So topside is watching everything you do. The archaeologists are up there watching it. We had an archaeologist or historian assigned to every shift and every dive. They were on those cameras. And even though we went through the plan before every dive, and then the 2 divers before they would go down, they were watching the dive team before them. So they knew what happened before on the dive before them. So they knew what had already been done before they got down there, and they knew what the plan was before they got down there, so that there would be no wasted time, because these bounce dives were usually 30 minutes. Sometimes we would go to 40 minutes. So we were using the surface decompression on oxygen Navy dive tables, 240 for 30, maybe 240 for 40 minutes dive tables. And we didn't want to waste any time, because you'll see here, after the dive was complete. So we had, communications, we had helmet mounted camera, we had helmet mounted lights, we had hot water going into our hot water suits. which was really nice. But you can see that umbilical that they're pulling behind them gets a little bit cumbersome. And you know, you're not on scuba where you're kind of free and floating and swimming around. You're hauling this heavy stuff behind you. And but that gives you a lot more time, and it gives you some other pros to that. And at the end of and you have Big Brother looking over your shoulder the whole time, and the archaeologist saying, "Don't touch that, don't step here, don't touch." Okay, you can touch that. Or the master diver saying, "Chris, go cut that." Or, "Pan to the right." No, hey, topside, I'm working here. I don't care, pan to the right, you know. And so you know, it works. So at the end of the 25 minutes, so topside saying, "Okay, stop what you're doing, get back on the stage." The stage is 20 feet up. You have to grab onto your umbilical and pull yourself up to the stage and get yourself ready to start traveling up. And then they bring you up on the stage. And then you start your in-water decompression stops, an hour of in-water decompression for these tables, stopping at different depths for your in-water decompression stops. You get to the surface, your tenders get you off the stage. It's like a NASCAR pit stop, because your tenders are pulling off all your gear and getting you into the chamber in 5 minutes or less, and then down to depth. And then you do your chamber decompression, which is, you know, about 2 hours and 15 minutes in the chamber. And we had 2 chambers for the bounce divers on the barge. We had 1 chamber to do for the decompression for the bounce dives. And then we had another chamber, so that once that 2-man team gets in that chamber and starts their decompression, we can put the next team, the next 2-person team can start their dive. And then we still have a free chamber in case we have an emergency that we need to treat. So we didn't have to wait 2 hours and 15 minutes before we start the next dive. We can start the next dive as soon as the divers are in the chamber at depth and stable. So we could keep flowing, and that's how we maximized the amount of man hours working on the bottom, so we could get things done in 45 days before hurricane season started, because we had a lot of work that we needed to get done to get this all done, to maximize our time there, so that we could get it done within the time frame and within the amount of money that we had available to us, because it's not cheap renting that equipment, renting the barge, you know, paying the people that we were paying. And you saw those numbers and they looked like, wow, that's a lot of money. And it went fast. Phase 1, this is what we had to do. Clear that armor belt off. That armor belt had to come off so we could get to the turret, because we couldn't slide that turret out to bring it to the surface. We had to, there's the dimensions, 48 feet of armor belt had to come off. And there was still some of the hull plating, not a lot of it attached to the armor belt, but a little bit. So what's that armor belt made up of? It's really a lot of stuff. It was designed to keep those enemy cannonballs from piercing the hull of the ship. And it did a really good job of that. 1-inch, 1-inch thick plates of armor wrapped around this composite wood with iron spikes throughout the whole thing. So again, marine salvage, how do you cut through that stuff that's been in salt water for 140 years? Who knows? So a little bit of trial and error going on there. We tried Broco cutting torches, cut through some of it, cut through, you know, some of the armor plates, hydraulic chainsaws, those hydroblasters, which the divers love, those hydroblasters. Imagine that. They cut through the wood kind of nicely, but not all of it. So we had to just keep doing some trial and error. And we were making good progress, but not nearly as fast as what our original timeline was. It was going really slow, and it was putting us behind our original schedule. So finally, one of our chief bosun mates, it wasn't even like a welder or something, one of our chief welders, a chief bosun mate came up with this great idea of taking a 1/4-inch wire rope, attaching it to a winch up on the barge and taking it all the way down 230, 40 feet, wrapping it around where the cut was already started, and then just taking it to the winch and sawing it back and forth with the winch to get through the last little bit of that armor belt. And, wouldn't you know what, those bows are incredible. That got us through that last little bit. And then on July 5th, 2002, we made it through. We had it rigged up, of course, that piece of armor belt, rigged up to the 100-ton crane when we made it through. And on July 5th, we were able to get all the way through and lifted that piece of armor belt off to the side. It's still down there. As far as I know, it's still down there. It is still down there. And because the museum said they couldn't take that 48-foot piece of armor belt, so they couldn't accommodate that. And it exposed the turret for the first time. I think somebody needs to go back there and cut off about a 5-foot section of the armor belt to bring back to the museum. I think that would be so incredibly cool to have that on display. Somebody,
I've seen it.
somebody,
It's there.
I'm just saying. Anyway,
It's there.
yeah, it's neat. So anyway, so phase 2, we need to recover the turret. But in order to recover the turret, it's sunk down in the sand about halfway. It's 27 feet in diameter, 9 feet tall, stuck down into the sand and silt. We had to clear it out before we could bring it up. And we had to design something that would bring it up without crushing it or damaging it further. And so, the engineers put their heads together, and it took a lot of planning. We were planning this for months before we went out there, of course. And the engineers came out with a unique lifting device, and then we had to build it. And of course, then we had to name it. We named it the Spider for obvious reasons. And it's this lifting mechanism. You have like a soda can. You have a soda can, and you take this lifting mechanism and you take it down, and then you wrap it around the soda can and you bring it up. And the Spider we'd send it down, and the Spider legs were extended out, not all the way, like about 15 degrees. And then you'd set it down, and then you'd close the Spider legs, and the Spider legs have little feet on them, and the little feet go underneath the lower lip of the turret. And then it sets underneath the turret, and then the turret comes up on those feet. So it's lifting on the bottom of the turret. Now, keep in mind, the turret's upside down. So it's not really the bottom of the turret. You're lifting it up on the top of the turret. And the turret is upside down on its roof. And the roof of the turret was never designed to carry a load. It's just like a very, lightweight material that was on the top of the turret. So it's never designed to carry a load. So the Spider was fabricated. And so we had to clear out the silt that was around the outside of the turret so we could get the Spider legs down underneath the bottom lip of the turret to bring it up. So we used the hydroblaster a lot to get to clear out the sand and silt around the outside of the turret. And that took a lot. The saturation divers worked a lot on that because they could work for a long time. They didn't have to spend all that extra time of rigging the hydroblaster and then setting it up. They could work for 6 hours solid, rig it once at the beginning of 6 hours, get in place and go for 6 hours solid, just hydroblasting around the outside. And being very careful, not to hydroblast the actual surface of the turret because they have a thing called concretion, which I learned a lot about, which is protecting the outside of the turret after 140 years. We didn't want to knock off any of that because then you lose metal, and archaeologists didn't like this. And then once we actually got to the point where we could put the Spider down outside of the turret, then the divers could go down there, and we had hand-operated hydraulic systems on each of the Spider legs that then they could operate it so that the Spider legs would close down vertically and get the Spider feet underneath the turret. But while that was happening, we also had to simultaneously, it says phase 3, but simultaneously, we had to excavate what was inside the turret because we had to get some of the weight out of the turret. Remember, the bottom of the turret was actually the steeling, not designed to carry any weight. So we had to not only lighten the turret, so it was light enough for that 500-ton crane to lift to the surface, but we also did want to lift the turret and have all the contents go falling out of the turret and scattered all over the Atlantic Ocean floor because we knew that the turret held lots of valuable artifacts because the turret was actually the point of egress for anybody coming out of the Monitor when she was sinking. It was the single point of egress for any of the sailors that were down below decks. So we knew that there were artifacts inside the turret, and we suspected that maybe there were some sailors that didn't make it out of the Monitor that might be in the turret. So we were excavating using adductor systems, which is a big vacuum hose. And we were adducting the sand and silt out of the turret into big salvage baskets up on the barge. And then the archaeologists were going through it with a fine-tooth comb, or whatever they call that thing. It's an archaeology thing. And thank goodness they were doing it. It was smelly and it was hard work, and they found incredible stuff, wedding bands, spoons, buttons, cloth jackets that they've conserved. It's incredible, the conservation stuff that's going on up there. And we found the cannons, 2 cannons, yay, cannons were there. And then we were worried about, not worried, we were, we thought that we might find sailors. And so we talked to the Central Identification Lab in Hawaii and put together a protocol in case we did find sailors. And we worked with them to do that. And then they sent one of their people out on the barge. And he came out from Hawaii, and he was on the barge with us the whole time. And late one night, one of our saturation divers did in fact say, and sure enough, he did. We got the Silhigh guy out of his rack, and he came flying out of his rack. And yep, we did. And so everything stopped on the barge. Everything stopped on the barge. And we went through the protocol and did all the, documented everything and carefully, did what we were supposed to do, and found 2 sailors and brought them back. And the gentleman from Silhigh took them home to Hawaii to the Central Identification Lab, and he escorted them himself back to Hawaii. And it worked the way it was supposed to. And once that was all done, and it was the most everybody on the barge was affected by that. And then we got that done, and then we went back to work. And then we continued excavating until we were down to the level that the engineers said. We weren't down to the very bottom. We still had some silt and stuff in the bottom, and that was enough. But we had to shore up the ceiling, which was the bottom. We had to shore that up a little bit. And then it was like, okay, is this it? Have we done everything we needed to do? Well, we shored up the archaeologist said, well, we got to shore up the ceiling. We did that. Okay. All right. Big breath. Okay. Is this it? Well, it's kind of it. But then, this is the first week of August off the coast of Cape Hatteras. And what happens the first week of August, the weather goes to pieces. And of course it does. And we're getting ready to make the lift. And of course, every VIP on the East Coast wants to be there when we lift the turret out of the water. And then the media wants to be there. And Dr. John Barwater from NOAA, who's just a wonderful guy, and I are pulling our hair out because the weather's bad, and we have all these VIPs sitting on the beach at Cape Hatteras, and we've got all this media sitting on the beach, and they want to come out. And we have all these helicopters and small boats that are circling the wagons. And I'm not a big, I wasn't a big fan of having media on board, although we'd had them out there back and forth off and on during the summer. But it's like the last thing I needed was to have it documented that I built the Monitor's turret. But the weather was not cooperating. But we were kind of under the gun because in addition to the VIPs and the media and that kind of stuff, we were losing our weather window. It wasn't going to get any better in August. It was just going to keep deteriorating. We were starting to run out of funding. We had a decision to make. Do we wait and see if it gets any better, which wasn't a good call? Do we just wait, leave things down there and come back next summer? You know, that's risky, and, you know, our money wasn't programmed for the next year. We'd have to find more funding. Did we, you know, did we operate on the edge of the weather window? And we kept saying, you know, we have to have perfect weather to do this because we don't want to screw this up. We only get one chance. You know, it's not like you could bring her up and then set her back down. You know, once you make the call, you have to go for it. It's, you know, one chance and one chance only. And and you know, that photo there was a non-starter. And so, you know, it was really tense at that point because we had worked so hard and everybody wanted to see this through to the end. And so, you know, we were in these meetings and we were just, and all the VIP, it was a Sunday and all the VIPs were like calling me on the phone and all this stuff. But one admiral, I won't tell you his name, and I didn't work for him or anything. He was just there. And he called me up and he said, Commander Scholley, you do what's right for you. You don't worry about anybody else. You do what's right for you. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks, Admiral. Which, you know, actually was a nice thing for him to do because I just needed a little boost of confidence there. But one of my my right-hand man, one of my warrant officers, Rick Cavey, and my master diver, came up to me and they said, we think we have a plan. I'm like, well, okay, guys, so what's your plan? And so they took me up to our little pilot house and they got the charts around. And the barge out there was set up in an 8-point moor, which means each 4 corners had 2 anchors out, and they had dynamic positioning mooring system, which is, you know, really fancy. You know, they could bring the anchor chains in and out, you know, pretty easily. And then they had their tugboat stayed out there with us the whole time. So they had a tug available to do whatever we needed them to do. And I told you the barge crew was excellent and they were really sharp guys. And so was the tug guy, the tug skipper. And so my guys proposed to me that let's move the barge. I'm like, are you out of your mind? You want to move the barge the last couple days of the operation? And they said, well, you know, we could move the barge, you know, just a couple degrees and put our head into the waves and, you know, this and this and this and this. And John Broadwater was up there with me and you know, I'm looking at John. What do you think, John? And he's like, I don't know. This isn't my stuff. And so anyway, we looked at it a little bit and we talked it through and okay, let's do it. And so we ended up moving the anchors to move the barge because we had to move it more than what we could with the dynamic positioning of the anchors. So we picked up 8 anchors overnight and moved the barge, not a lot, I mean, because we couldn't move it away from the monitor. We just had to move it enough to move our heading. And it was enough to get us positioned. And the seas came down a little bit. And oops. And Monday morning, the seas settled down enough. That's a little misleading, but Monday morning it settled down enough that we decided to take it one step at a time. And the first thing we had to do, we had to put down this platform. And the platform had to go down first because we couldn't just bring it up all in one piece, you know, when everything fell out. We had to move the monitor, bring it up about 20 feet and then move it over. We set the platform on the bottom first and then set the monitor on top of this platform and then marry the two together. So we had a little bit of the platform and then we would bring it all up at once. And you see those 2 little white posts sticking up on the platform? Those are called stabbing guides. And then the spider actually had 2 little rings. And so Bobbie had to swing it over and put those 2 little rings on that stabbing guide. While we had a diver down there with his helmet mounted camera pointing at the stabbing guide saying, okay, a little more, a little more, a little more. Okay, down, 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 down. Okay, no, up, 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 up. Okay, down, down, down. And so Yeah, you think this gray hair is from now? No, it's from 22 years ago. So, but before we could do that, when we put the slings down, eight wire slings with these shackles that are the size of my head, we put down, one of my chiefs had to go down there to hook up the shackles to the spider, and it was the current was a little bit ripping, and one diver went down there to do that, and it was like spaghetti. And with his helium voice, the comment was he used all 7 swear words that you cannot use on TV. Helium voice while he's hooking up these shackles, the whole time he's hooking up these shackles. It was a little comic relief, but he got it. So anyway, it took us, we did one step at a time, but each step we reevaluated, okay, we can keep moving. It took us 8 hours, but to get through each step. But by Monday afternoon, about 6 p.m., I don't know, it's documented someplace. By about 6 p.m. Monday evening, we were ready to make the lift. And sure enough, the Monitor's turret came up and it didn't deteriorate. Thank goodness. It didn't deteriorate when it broke the surface and came to the surface. And it was a beautiful day. I mean, it looks perfect. It didn't start out that way, but by the time we brought her up, you can see the helicopters and the media boats, and everybody was there. Not all the VIPs kind of went home. So it came to the surface, swung her over, set her down on the barge. Everybody was happy, cheering, crying. It was a good day. So it worked. What were the benefits? The Navy got so much training. Over the course of 3 years, we trained hundreds of divers, not just the divers at my command, at Mobile Diving Salvage Unit 2. We had divers from all over the Navy. We had reserve divers out there. Some were only there for 2 weeks. Most of my guys were there for the whole 45 days, but we brought in divers from all over the Navy for, and rotated them through to get this fabulous training. And I would say, and I now know this in hindsight, that we trained a whole generation of divers on this operation. And some of those divers who were straight out of dive school, old timers like me, but a lot of those guys and gals went on to become leaders in the diving community. And I can say that now because I know these people now and I followed their careers after this, and absolutely leaders. And we proved some proofs of concept. We tested out tools, systems that we now use and that we've used in the Navy. So it was a win-win. And we got to be a part of Navy history by bringing back these artifacts, and everybody on that barge felt so good about it. One of the divers, when I was standing and looking over the rail late one night during shift, the night shift, and he said, "Captain, I can't wait until I can bring my grandchildren to the museum and show them I got to be a part of it." Wow, Simon Eddie, that's really deep. Then you had kids, but it was that kind of stuff. It was just really the Mariners Museum, different museum. Not much. They have a little bit of diving now because of us, but their Mariners Museum up in Newport. If you ever get up there, they have a whole center dedicated to the Monitor that was built around Monitor. And they also have a very cool website that follows the conservation effort. So it's not just about history, but it's education that includes history, math, science, engineering, because of what they're doing, especially with conservation. So it's very cool that they've taken this, being the curators of the Monitor artifacts, and turned it into this really cool education thing. The NOAA's website also kind of follows along what's going on with the conservation, and they've been out there a couple times since then. Not as much as they'd like to be, obviously, because of funding issues, but you can follow along. The media drove me crazy, but I'm glad they were out there because they documented history in the making. Two of my favorite books, which I have here, Ironclad, was a journalist. I kind of liked him. He was a local journalist. John Broadwater has a fabulous book out. His proceeds go to an archaeology heritage, something or other, a nonprofit. And then a little kid's book. So some good, but 2 documentaries. I had 2 mics on me that whole day. So I had to clean up my language on the last day while we're making the lift. Is that fair or what? So, and if I messed up, they edited it out. So at least they did that. Darn media. Any questions? Sally.
I have two questions. Was there some sort of a translator that translates the helios voice?
Now,
Not.
Make sure that you repeat the question so people understand.
okay. Sally asked if there was any Heliox translator. No, after you hear it for a while, you start developing an ear for being able to interpret the helium voice. But we also use standard commands when we're diving in Heliox. So when you're making a descent down and the topside asks you, okay, red, okay, green, the standard answer is yes, yes, red, yes, yes, green. So we have standard commands for certain questions. But then if you ask a question, red diver, what's going on with the grout bag?
Well,
You're
that had
good.
been invented by then, that's the stuff with the translator.
Yeah, now,
Yeah.
now, we just put up with it.
And didn't you ever tilt it so that it's right side up? Did anybody not tilt it? Is it still sitting there
No, it's
upside down?
No, because it's too deteriorated. You cannot, no, the question was, have we ever tilted the monitor? No, it's too large and too deteriorated to actually tip it back over. Yeah, by the time it was found, it was just too far gone, too deteriorated to actually try to tilt it back over. So, yes.
For the two sailors that were found, do you know if they ever found any living family members to them once they were returned to Hawaii?
The question was, the two sailors that we found, have they found any family members? That's my last slide.
Oh.
Silhai was so busy after that with Iraq and Afghanistan and the active duty sailors and active duty military members that our two monitor sailors were kind of put on the back burner. But in 2013, the Navy NOAA held amazing interment ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery and interred those two sailors in Arlington, and a plaque was dedicated to all 16 sailors that were lost on the Monitor, and family members of all 16 sailors that were lost were invited to the interment ceremony. I was invited also. It was incredible, and they think they know who those two sailors are, but it wasn't confirmed by DNA yet because the Central Identification Lab had been so busy during that time period with active duty people, and but people kind of wink, nudge, think they knew who they were and their family members were there, but not confirmed yet. But those two members are interned in Arlington, and the plaque is for all 16 sailors, and it was just heartwarming, the ceremony that was held, and you can go visit their plaque there.
I have one from someone on Zoom. They asked, was the viz always good like it was in the photos that you showed?
The question on the visibility is that the visibility was actually pretty good in 2002. Now, in 2000, when they were doing the grout bags, the visibility was terrible but the visibility was pretty good. I personally liked diving at night better than daytime. Not that it mattered that much because 230 feet, you don't get a whole lot of sunlight down there, so it didn't really matter. And we had our helmet-mounted cameras helmet-mounted lights were pretty good. We also had an ROV down there at sometimes that had a great light on it also that was helping us. But visibility was pretty good, and there's some video on NOAA's website that was taken just the last couple of years that has beautiful visibility because their divers don't kick up as much as Navy divers do. But visibility is really good down there, and it's a beautiful natural habitat now, and it has so much sea life on it, and which I didn't get to appreciate that much because when I was down there, I was usually working and I didn't have time to kind of sightsee. But a lot of sea life, and so there's a beautiful habitat down there. And another question?
I have one more question. I'm intrigued by the term sailors. Wouldn't they be more in the category of human remains, or are they actually intact? I mean, in one spot confined bodies?
The question was using the term finding sailors in the turret as opposed to finding remains. And because this was a Navy ship, and so we considered this part of our naval heritage. The divers referred, we got very close to the crew. We had pictures, you know, of the old pictures of the crew all over the barge. And we started talking about the crew of the Monitor, the original crew of the Monitor. And, you know, we kind of knew some of their names, and we talked about them all the time when we were out there on the barge. So we kind of got personally invested in the original Monitor crew, and we thought of ourselves as the modern day Monitor crew, Monitor Expedition crew. So it became very personal. So we referred to them as, you know, the Monitor sailors, and they were our shipmates, and we thought of them as our shipmates. So we referred to them more in a more personal manner than remains, because, you know, we all have done those kind of jobs before where we're recovering remains. And so we did. And what was interesting, because the turret was filled quickly with sand and silt, both of the skeletons that we found were completely, fully articulated, full skeletal remains. So that was incredible. And we documented that, obviously, for the Central Identification Lab. So that made it even more personal, that it wasn't just, you know, a fragment here, or, you know, one bone here, one bone there. It was a person. And so that's why we all refer to it as, you know, our Monitor sailors. We brought home shipmates.
Yeah, I get you there.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you again, Bobbie, for being our speaker for October. As a thank you for being our speaker, the museum would like to give you a year-long membership to visit the museum. So you can come here 362 days a year, and as well as a feature.
Okay,
so thank you very much, and thank you everyone who attended on Zoom. Thank you for everyone who came here in person, and we'll see you next month for